Just to start with a tribute, along with everybody else here, to the missing Sambat and to Shimeng. I have very fond memories of Sambat's hospitality in Vientiane two years ago. I'll also echo a little bit of what Mary said, and I'm going to start with a quote from Frantz Fanon, the great anti-colonial theorist, urging his fellow anti-colonial activists to abandon the idea of Europe, to leave Europe, where they're never done talking of humanity, but are never done actually murdering humanity, and for centuries having stifled other parts of the world, or exploited or robbed other parts of the world, and today swaying between atomic and spiritual disintegration, or perhaps between economic and political disintegration. And I think the principal challenge for all of us as European activists is for us to leave behind Europe, or at least a certain idea of Europe, and in particular of the European Union. And I do note that this event is supported by the European Union, but I do feel obliged to bite the hand that is feeding me this really delicious coffee. Nonetheless, I think it has to be done. Sorry, I'm going to see if I can move this. When I was thinking about the links between Europe and Asia in the context of the Asia-Europe People's Forum, and doing some research on free trade agreements that both Charles and Walden have spoken about, for me a paradigmatic example is the European Union-Korea Free Trade Agreement of 2011, where the European Union strong-armed the Korean government to relax its CO2 emissions standards in the automotive sector to allow more polluting European automobiles to be sold on the Korean market. And it's just one example. I could have picked many, but it really illustrates, I think, the very hypocritical nature of European claimed commitment to climate change. And more broadly, I think that relates to a concept of Europe's role in the world. And again, I think one of the illusions, one of the challenges we have to face is to give up on the illusion that the European Union in particular represents a force, a progressive force in the world. The European Union has endorsed what is essentially a fascist coup in the Ukraine. It is pushing the transatlantic trade and investment partnership, of which more will be talked about in the workshops and the plenaries. And that I would like to point out there, that is not crude neoliberal American capitalism imposing this on Europe. This is a two-way street. This is European corporate constituencies pushing the rights of corporations over the public. The European Union is deeply complicit in the scramble for Africa, African resources through the Raw Materials Initiative and so on. And Palestine, the occupation of Palestine, is largely underwritten and funded by the European Union. And however, of course, this is not a monolith, and I would like to pay tribute to the decision of the new Swedish government to recognize Palestinian statehood. I think that is a significant advance. But that's a national initiative, not a European Union initiative, and I'll come back to nationalism. Of course, we all know that if we turn our gaze from Europe's role in the world to the role of the European Union within Europe, the recent crisis has seen a deepening of neoliberalism, the cutbacks and privatizations, etc., that Mary spoke about, imposed upon countries like Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Cyprus. But also more broadly, I just wanted to quote an eminent Italian, given where I am, Mario Draghi, the governor of the European Central Bank, in a secret memorandum, subsequently leaked to the Italian government, calling for the full liberalization of local public services through large-scale privatizations. And a report produced by the Transnational Institute noted last year that we have this irony that an economic crisis that should have seen the death of neoliberalism has instead been used to entrench neoliberalism, if necessary by dispensing with democracy, as has happened here in terms of the imposition of a technocratic prime minister, but as also happened, of course, in Greece as well. And then we've seen the introduction of the six-pack, the two-pack, the fiscal treaty, and all of the architecture of fiscal surveillance that seeks to lock democratically elected governments into neoliberal straitjackets. And the contempt for democracy that I think the agencies concerned have is sometimes remarkably explicit. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, during the 2012 debates on the fiscal treaty, saying, well, Europe wouldn't function anymore if it changed course after every election. So a quite clear attempt to sideline the democratic rights of European people. That, of course, has generated a reaction. I'm not going to go through all of these numbers, but what they, in summary, suggest is a massive fall-off in support for European institutions, a growing level of distrust for European institutions, wholly legitimate and wholly justified distrust for European institutions. And of course, we saw that translate into electoral reform in May of this year, when you saw significant gains for anti-EU parties of both right and left. And a challenge, I think, for parties of the left is whether we are actually pushing a radical enough agenda here. Are we willing to actually seek to break up European integration itself? I'm a fan of the Dutch Socialist Party, and this question could be posed of many parties. But to say that we want the European Central Bank to play a more active role in the crisis, and we want to give Greece more time to cut its deficit, I'm not sure. I think maybe we want to delegitimize the European Central Bank, and we want to give the Greek people the right to repudiate illegitimate debt rather than cut their deficit over a certain period of time. I think maybe we're not doing enough to capture the mood of popular anger against the European institutions. And my fear, I'm going to skip over the next couple of slides which talk about the new social movements, because we'll be hearing, I'm sure, from, I know I'm very interested in hearing from Podemos on that, and I'll skip to the conclusion, which is partly about the social movements a la Podemos engaging with what you might term traditional politics. But let me stick with this argument that the left parties are being too cautious on Europe, that we need to reject the existing model of European integration. And a challenge for us is that if we fail to do that, then we will leave that popular anger to be channeled by the Front National or by the United Kingdom Independence Party or by forces of the right. And I'm going to conclude with the argument that instead of seeing nationalism as the preserve of the right, the left needs to engage with and mobilize a progressive, inclusive nationalism in the anti-colonial tradition that Anu spoke of. And I think we saw that in the Scottish referendum. The Scottish Yes campaign was an inclusive, left-oriented campaign, a civic, inclusive nationalism. And perhaps that will also be true of the Catalan referendum campaign as well, here's hoping. So I think in conclusion, we need, of course, to reject xenophobic identity politics, but between that and an increasingly right-wing and authoritarian European Union that has institutionalized itself against progressive reform, I think we need to build new democratic spaces at local and national levels where popular will can be translated into political outcomes, political progress towards a just and inclusive Europe and a more progressive European role in the world. Thank you.